Tonight, I invite you on a gentle journey, a peaceful escape where worries melt away and serenity embraces you like a warm, comforting breeze. As you settle into a cozy, restful position, allow your breath to slow, inhaling deeply and exhaling softly. Feel the weight of the day fade as you prepare to drift into a world of tranquility. Tonight's story will take you on a soothing journey, perhaps through quiet moonlit meadows, along the shores of a gently lapping sea, or floating effortlessly among the stars. Wherever we travel, know that this is a place of rest, of peace, and of dreams waiting to unfold. So close your eyes, relax your mind, and let the journey begin. Beyond the midnight hour. Chapter 1: A Curious Clue. The morning light streamed through the lace curtains of Greenfield's quaintest cafe, filling the air with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. Lucy Hart and Jake Carter sat at their usual table by the window, a perfect spot for people watching and, more often than not, eavesdropping on the latest town gossip. Lucy stirred her hot chocolate absent-mindedly while Jake took a sip of his black coffee. Their weekend ritual was peaceful, until they overheard a conversation at the counter that made them both pause. Mrs. Whitmore, Greenfield's self-appointed news source, leaned in close to Mr. Caldwell, the cafe's owner. Her voice was hushed but urgent, thick with the weight of fresh scandal. "I tell you, George, the mayor is beside himself," she whispered. "His watch, gone, just like that. Vanished from his office sometime yesterday afternoon." Jake raised an eyebrow. Mayor Thompson's gold pocket watch wasn't just any watch. It was practically legendary. A family heirloom, passed down for generations. It was the kind of thing he never let out of his sight. "Who would steal it?" Mr. Caldwell asked, frowning as he wiped down the counter. Mrs. Whitmore lowered her voice even more, though it was clear she wanted everyone to hear. "Well, I did see someone lurking near his office before it disappeared." She leaned forward, eyes darting around dramatically before she whispered, "A stranger." Jake and Lucy exchanged glances. "A stranger," Jake murmured. "That's rare." Lucy nodded. Greenfield was the kind of town where everyone knew each other. Strangers stuck out, and one loitering near the mayor's office just before a theft. That was more than suspicious. Mrs. Whitmore continued, oblivious to their interest. "He was tall, wearing a dark coat and hat, hanging around like he was waiting for something, or someone." Jake leaned back in his chair. "This just got interesting." Lucy's lips curled into a grin. "You know what this means, right?" Jake groaned. "Oh no, we're not doing this again." "Come on, Jake, it's a mystery. The mayor's watch didn't just walk away. The last time we investigated something, we ended up locked in a basement." Lucy waved a hand dismissively. "That was an accident." Jake snorted. "The cat locked us in, Lucy." Lucy shrugged. "Details?" Jake sighed, but he was already intrigued. "Fine. What's the plan, Detective?" Lucy's eyes sparkled. First, we visit the scene of the crime. Then we find this mysterious stranger. Jake downed the last of his coffee. Let's hope we don't regret this. Chapter 2: The Mysterious Stranger. The steady hum of the town library was a stark contrast to the storm of questions brewing in Henry's mind. The scent of aged books and ink filled the air as he and Ben watched Raymond Porter flip through a thick, leather-bound volume. He sat hunched at a wooden table near the grand arched window, where the late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows over the dusty pages. Porter was a wiry man in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair combed neatly to one side. His thin-rimmed glasses perched at the bridge of his nose, magnifying the sharp intelligence behind his dark eyes. He gave off an air of quiet reserve, but something about him didn't sit right with Henry. When he had arrived in town just days before the gala, few had taken notice. But now, with the theft of the Oakhaven heirloom and the growing list of unanswered questions, his presence suddenly seemed too convenient to ignore. Henry took a seat across from Porter, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. Ben remained standing with his arms crossed, watching Porter with quiet scrutiny. "Mr. Porter," Henry began, leaning forward, "you said you came to Oakhaven to research family records?" Porter barely glanced up from his book. "That's right," he replied, turning a page with deliberate care. "My great-grandmother was born here. I wanted to trace my lineage." Henry exchanged a glance with Ben. "And that couldn't be done online?" Porter chuckled, a low, dry sound. "Some things are best found in person. There are records in this town that never made it to the digital archives. Small towns like Oakhaven have a way of keeping history tucked away in forgotten drawers." Henry drummed his fingers on the table. "Interesting timing, though. You arrived just days before the gala." Porter finally looked up. His dark eyes flickered with something unreadable. "A coincidence?" Ben scoffed. "I don't believe in coincidences." Porter gave a small smile. "That's unfortunate. Life is full of them." Before Henry could press further, Lucy appeared at the edge of the table, a book tucked under her arm. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Henry knew her well enough to see the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Porter," she said lightly, "I couldn't help but notice you've been looking at some rather specific records." Porter raised an eyebrow. "Curiosity is a natural part of research." Lucy's lips pressed together in a thin line. "Perhaps, but the files you requested," she slid the book onto the table, "were not about your family. They were about the Lockwood estate." Henry's pulse quickened. The Lockwood estate, home of the missing heirloom. Ben straightened. "Why would you be looking into that?" Porter sighed and closed his book. "It's really quite simple. I heard about the gala and the heirloom, and I was curious. That brooch has been a part of this town's history for generations, and I wanted to know more." Henry studied him. "You expect us to believe you just happened to take an interest in the very object that was stolen?" Porter smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Believe what you will, Mr. Lane." Lucy hesitated. then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. She placed it on the table in front of Henry. "I found this in the records room after Mr. Porter left." Henry unfolded the paper. His breath hitched as he read the hastily scrawled note. "It's not safe here. Meet me at midnight. The old chapel." Silence thickened between them. Porter didn't move. Ben spoke first. "Care to explain that?" Porter took his time adjusting his glasses. "That," he said slowly, "is none of your concern." Henry's jaw tightened. "Actually, it is." Porter met his gaze, unreadable as ever. "Then I suggest you meet me at midnight," he said, standing up and gathering his books. "If you really want answers." He turned and strode away without another word. Ben exhaled sharply. "That guy is full of it." Lucy shook her head. "No, he's hiding something. And I think we need to find out what." Henry stared at the note in his hand. The old chapel had been abandoned for decades, its stained glass windows long shattered, its pews covered in dust and cobwebs. "Midnight, then," he said. Lucy and Ben nodded. None of them said what they were all thinking. If Porter was leading them into a trap, they were walking straight into it. And they had no idea what or who would be waiting for them. Chapter 3. The Secret Passage. Lucy adjusted her flashlight as she and Jake tiptoed through the dimly lit corridors of the town hall. The building had stood in Maplewood for over a century, its wooden beams creaking under the weight of history. The scent of aged paper and polished wood filled the air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of dust. They had spent weeks following rumors of a secret passage, a hidden tunnel that led directly to the mayor's office. The town hall had been at the center of the recent string of thefts, artifacts missing from the local museum, financial records mysteriously disappearing, and, most recently, the break-in at the mayor's office itself. If they could find the passage, maybe they could find the thief. "I still don't get it," Jake muttered, keeping his voice low. "Why would someone need a secret way into the mayor's office? Doesn't he just keep paperwork in there?" Lucy shot him a look, her brown eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Exactly. Someone wants to get into those files without being seen." She gestured toward the floor. "And since the alarms never went off during the last break-in, I'd say they used a hidden way in." Jake nodded, running his fingers along the wooden panels of the wall. "We're in the oldest part of the building. If there's a passage, it's gotta be here." They continued their search, knocking on walls and tapping the floorboards, listening for anything that sounded hollow. After what felt like an eternity, Lucy's hand brushed against a groove in the wood. She pressed against it, and with a faint click, a panel slid open, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel. Jake exhaled sharply. "No way," Lucy grinned. "Told you." The tunnel smelled of damp wood and something faintly musty, like a place that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Lucy took the lead, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing cobwebs that hung like curtains. The passage was just wide enough for them to walk single file, the walls pressing close on either side. As they moved forward, the air grew cooler, and Lucy's heart pounded in her chest. The floor creaked beneath their careful steps, but otherwise the passage remained eerily silent. Then Jake let out a hushed exclamation. "Look at this!" Lucy turned, her flashlight beam landing on a wooden beam where something was wedged into the splintered edge. She stepped closer, reaching out carefully. It was a torn piece of fabric, dark in color, its edges frayed as if it had been caught on something, or someone. Jake studied it. That could have come from the thief. Lucy nodded, stuffing the fabric into her pocket. Which means they've been here recently. A shiver ran down her spine as they pressed on. The tunnel curved slightly, then opened up into a small alcove, the back wall made of stone. Jake ran his hands over it, searching for a latch. "There's got to be a door," he murmured. Lucy helped him search, her fingers brushing against the rough stone until she found a small, nearly invisible lever. She gave it a tug, and the wall groaned as it slowly shifted inward, revealing the mayor's office on the other side. They stepped through, emerging behind a massive wooden bookshelf. The room was dark, but moonlight spilled in through the tall windows, casting eerie shadows across the desk and filing cabinets. Jake exhaled. "We actually made it." Lucy moved toward the desk, her fingers tracing the edge. "Let's see if anything looks—" A creak echoed through the room. They both froze. Then, from the darkness, came the distinct sound of footsteps. Lucy barely had time to register the sound before a cold hand clamped over her mouth, yanking her backward into the shadows. Jake spun around. "Lucy!" But before he could react, a second figure emerged from the darkness, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him into the abyss. The secret passage had led them straight into danger. Chapter 4: A Red Herring. Officer Carter pulled his coat tight against the crisp night air as he walked along the dimly lit alley behind Parker's pub. The scent of stale beer and damp pavement mixed in the air, but he barely noticed. His mind was locked onto the lead he'd received that afternoon. A local pickpocket, Reggie Moore, had been seen in the area, supposedly carrying something valuable. The anonymous tip hadn't specified what, but Carter was willing to check any lead that might bring him closer to the case he was working. The real question was this about Henry, or was he wasting his time? Reggie was no stranger to petty theft, but he wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind. Carter had arrested him a few times before, mostly for lifting wallets and watches from distracted tourists. The guy wasn't violent, just desperate. Still, the tip had been specific enough that Carter couldn't ignore it. As he neared the alley's entrance, he spotted a silhouette against the brick wall. Reggie was slouched in the shadows, hood up, cigarette dangling from his lips. His wiry frame twitched as he noticed Carter approaching, and he immediately took a step back. "Relax, Reggie," Carter said, holding up his hands. "Just want to talk." Reggie exhaled smoke through his nose. "I ain't done nothin'," he muttered. "That's funny," Carter replied, "because I hear you've been walking around with something you shouldn't have." Reggie's face twisted. "What? Nah, man, I got no idea what you're talking about. Carter took another step forward, lowering his voice. Then why'd someone drop your name in connection to a missing item? Something important. Reggie shifted uneasily, flicking his cigarette onto the pavement. Look, man, I don't know what you heard, but I ain't got nothing. I picked a few pockets, sure, but it was just cash. Nothing fancy. Ain't worth getting my head cracked over. Carter studied him carefully. Reggie wasn't the best liar, but his eyes held genuine confusion. Either he was a phenomenal actor, or the tip had been wrong. What about the guy who gave you the tip? Carter asked. Anyone strange talking to you lately? Reggie shook his head. Just the usual folks. Look, man, if I had something worth telling you, I would. I don't need more heat on me than I already got. Carter sighed, frustrated. If Reggie was telling the truth, then this was another dead end. You sure you don't know anything? He pressed. I swear, man, Reggie insisted. I got nothing to do with whatever you're looking for. Carter watched him a moment longer, then reluctantly took a step back. All right. But if you hear anything, you find me. Reggie nodded quickly, then disappeared into the night, leaving Carter standing alone in the alley. The whole thing had been a waste of time. Someone had thrown him off the trail, and now he was back at square one. Meanwhile, across town, Henry sat at the small desk in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the folded note in his hand. It had arrived just an hour ago, slipped under his door with no sound, no indication of who had left it. The words on the paper were written in uneven, almost frantic handwriting. Midnight holds the key. That was all it said. No signature, no explanation. Henry felt a chill run down his spine. He read it again, as if expecting the meaning to suddenly become clear, but it remained as cryptic as ever. Midnight. The word gnawed at his thoughts. Did it mean a time, a place, a person? He set the note down and rubbed his temples. He didn't like this. An anonymous message showing up at his door wasn't just unsettling, it was dangerous. Someone knew where he lived. Someone was watching. He glanced at the clock. 11:15 p.m. Midnight was less than an hour away. His first instinct was to call Carter, but something held him back. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like this was something he needed to figure out himself, at least for now. He turned the note over, checking the back, but it was blank. No watermarks, no signs of where it had come from. Henry exhaled slowly, his mind racing. If Midnight held the key, then he had 45 minutes to figure out where he needed to be. The city outside his window was alive with movement. Cars passing, neon signs flickering, shadows shifting. Somewhere out there, the answer was waiting. And so was the person who had sent the note. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Henry made his decision. He grabbed his coat, slipped the note into his pocket, and stepped out into the night. He had to find out what was waiting for him, but he had no idea what he was walking into. Chapter 5: Midnight Clues. Lucy's fingers trembled as she turned the watch over in her hands. The antique timepiece had seemed like a simple theft at first, an easy case of a valuable family heirloom stolen for quick cash. But now, as Jake pried open the tiny backplate with the tip of his pocket knife, their theory shifted entirely. The soft click of the metal panel revealed a small, hollow compartment within the watch's inner casing. Nestled inside was a delicate brass key, no larger than a sewing needle. Jake exhaled sharply. "This isn't just a watch, Lucy. This is a puzzle." Lucy plucked the key from its hiding place and held it between her thumb and forefinger, turning it under the dim glow of Jake's flashlight. The key's design was intricate, its bow engraved with delicate swirls that reminded her of something she had seen before. But where? A sudden memory surfaced. The old town legend. "Jake," she whispered, "do you remember the story about the hidden vault in the town hall?" Jake's eyes widened. "The one that supposedly holds historical records from the town's founding? Yeah, but that's just a myth, isn't it?" Lucy's heart pounded. The legend had been passed down for generations. Talk of a secret chamber buried deep beneath the town hall, containing documents, maps, and records that had vanished from history. Some believed it held evidence of an old scandal. Others thought it was a treasure trove of knowledge deliberately hidden by the town's founders. She turned the key over again. What if this isn't just a myth? What if the vault is real, and this key opens it? Jake hesitated, then straightened his posture. "There's only one way to find out." The town hall at midnight. They waited until the streets emptied. The town hall looming in eerie silence beneath the glow of the street lamps. The grand building, with its towering columns and darkened windows, had stood in the heart of town for over a century. At night it felt almost alive, its structure groaning as if whispering secrets. Slipping through the alleyway, Lucy and Jake approached the rear entrance. The building had modern security measures, but they weren't worried about that. The legend claimed the vault was hidden deep underground beneath the archives. Jake reached into his backpack, pulling out a folded map he had swiped from the library. He traced a line with his finger. "The old blueprints show an access hatch in the basement. If the vault exists, it has to be beneath that." Lucy nodded. "Then we need to get inside without setting off any alarms." They crept around the building's side, their footsteps muffled against the cold pavement. Near the basement windows, Jake knelt down and examined the latch. "Locked," he muttered. Lucy glanced around and then smirked. "Let me try something." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a hairpin. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you know how to pick locks?" Lucy grinned. "I have a brother who kept locking me out of my own room. I had to learn a few tricks." After a few tense moments, the latch gave way with a soft click. Jake shook his head in amusement. "Remind me to never underestimate you." They slid open the window, crawling into the dark, musty basement. The air smelled of dust and aged paper, and the faint hum of a distant ventilation system filled the silence. The archives' rows of metal filing cabinets and wooden shelves lined the basement, filled with brittle documents and yellowed books. Lucy ran her fingers along the spines, feeling the weight of history around them. Jake motioned to a corner of the room where a large metal grate sat embedded in the floor. That has to be it. They crouched beside it, Jake pulling out a screwdriver from his bag. With a few careful twists, the screws loosened, and he pried the grate free. A dark tunnel yawned beneath them, descending into the unknown. Lucy hesitated. Are we seriously about to climb down into a hidden tunnel in the middle of the night? Jake grinned. Scared? She rolled her eyes. No, just making sure we don't end up in some horror movie situation. Jake swung his legs over the edge and dropped down, landing with a soft thud. All clear, he called up. Lucy followed, gripping the rough brick walls for balance. The passage was narrow, lined with ancient stones that looked centuries old. A chill ran down her spine. As they moved forward, Lucy's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows along the corridor. The air grew colder, the silence pressing against them like a heavy weight. At the end of the tunnel they found a heavy iron door. Its surface was covered in rust, but an ornate keyhole was set in the center, one that matched the delicate brass key Lucy still clutched in her palm. Her pulse quickened. Here goes nothing, she whispered, sliding the key into place. It fit perfectly. She turned it, and with a deep, shuddering groan, the door unlocked. Jake pushed it open, revealing a chamber bathed in the glow of a single, flickering lantern. Inside, shelves upon shelves of ancient scrolls, bound books, and aged parchment filled the room. But that wasn't what made Lucy freeze. In the center of the chamber, a figure stood waiting for them. A man, dressed in dark clothing, his face partially obscured by the dim light. You shouldn't have come here, he said, his voice low and edged with warning. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. Jake stepped in front of her, his fists clenched. Who are you? The man exhaled slowly, as if weighing his next words. I'm the one who's been protecting this place, and now you've put everything at risk. Before Lucy could react, the lantern flickered violently, and then, with a sudden gust of air, the chamber plunged into darkness. Chapter 6. Race Against Time. Henry and Ben stood in the dimly lit office of Mayor Thompson, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and ink. The mayor, an older man with deep wrinkles and tired eyes, sat behind his heavy oak desk, his fingers drumming anxiously against its surface. You're telling me this has something to do with my great-grandfather's stories? The mayor asked, his voice carrying equal parts skepticism and intrigue. Ben leaned forward. You said your family had secrets about the town. We need to know if they mentioned anything about tunnels, hidden rooms, anything unusual. The mayor exhaled deeply, then rose from his chair and walked over to a tall bookshelf. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books before selecting a thick leather-bound volume. He flipped through the yellowed pages, stopping near the middle. My great-grandfather, Samuel Thompson, used to tell stories about a vault hidden beneath the clock tower, he said, tapping the page. He always said it was meant to protect something important. Something the town couldn't afford to lose, but over time people dismissed it as old folklore. Henry exchanged a glance with Ben. A vault? Mayor Thompson nodded. Yes, but if it exists, it hasn't been opened in over a century. Ben straightened. Do you know how to access it? The mayor hesitated. Not exactly, but the clock tower's mechanism might be the key. The story suggests that at a specific time, midnight, something shifts in the structure. That's when the vault is supposed to reveal itself. Henry clenched his jaw. Then we have to get to the clock tower before midnight. Mayor Thompson closed the book, his expression grim. Be careful. If the vault is real, there's a reason it was hidden. Meanwhile, Lucy and Jake navigated the damp, musty passage beneath the town. The tunnel stretched into darkness, their flashlights casting eerie shadows against the rough stone walls. Are you sure this is the right way? Jake whispered, his breath visible in the cool air. Lucy nodded. I remember this section, but something's different now. She knelt, running her fingers over the stone floor. A deep set of scratches cut into the surface, as if something heavy had been dragged away. Jake crouched beside her. What do you think did this? Lucy frowned. Not what, who. They followed the scratches further, finding patches of disturbed dirt and small fragments of rusted metal. This wasn't here before, Lucy said, her voice uneasy. Jake's flashlight flickered over the wall ahead, revealing a gaping hole where a section of bricks had been removed. Lucy swallowed hard. Someone's already been here. A faint noise echoed from deeper within the tunnel, a low scraping sound, something shifting. Jake stiffened. Did you hear that? Lucy nodded, her heart pounding. We're not alone down here. Back above ground, Henry and Ben rushed toward the clock tower, their breath visible in the cold night air. The massive structure loomed over them, its iron hands creeping toward midnight. Ben glanced at his watch. 5 minutes. Henry pushed open the heavy wooden door, revealing a spiral staircase leading up into darkness. We don't have much time, he said, taking the steps 2 at a time. They climbed higher, the gears of the ancient clock groaning around them. Dust rained down with each movement of the massive mechanism. Ben stopped suddenly. Wait, look at this. He pointed to a small panel on the wall, covered in intricate engravings. A faint outline of a keyhole sat at its center. Henry reached out, brushing away the dust. This must be it. He pulled out the small, rusted key they had found earlier in the tunnels. It has to fit, he muttered, inserting it into the keyhole. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp click, the panel shifted. The ground beneath them trembled, and the entire floor began to descend like an elevator. Ben grabbed onto the railing. Hold on! The hidden platform carried them downward, deep beneath the tower. As it stopped, a massive iron door stood before them. Carved into the metal were the words, "Do not open." Ben swallowed hard. Well, that's not ominous at all. Henry reached for the handle, but before he could pull, a blood-curdling scream echoed from below. Lucy. Henry and Ben exchanged a panicked glance. Then the iron door began to open on its own. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. Henry's pulse pounded in his ears as he and Ben stood in Mr. Porter's cluttered study, the air thick with the scent of old books and pipe smoke. The dim glow from the desk lamp cast long shadows across the wooden floor, flickering over the yellowed documents spread before them. "This is it," Ben whispered, his fingers brushing the fragile parchment. Mr. Porter wasn't after the watch for money. He was trying to prove his ancestry. Henry nodded, his throat dry. "And if this document is real, then he's a direct descendant of the town's founder, Elias Whitmore." Mr. Porter, standing by the window, exhaled deeply. "For years I've searched for proof. Everyone dismissed my claims, called me a fraud. The watch was my last hope. It was passed down through generations of my family, until it disappeared." Henry frowned. "But if you weren't the one who stole it, then who—" The sudden creak of a floorboard cut him off. A shadow moved outside the study door. Ben spun around. "Did you hear that?" Before anyone could react, the door burst open, revealing a familiar figure, Mr. Eldridge, the town clerk. His beady eyes flickered with greed as he clutched a small, battered leather case. "Looking for this?" he sneered, holding up the stolen watch. The golden casing gleamed in the dim light, the intricate engravings marking it as a Whitmore family heirloom. Mr. Porter's face darkened with fury. "You stole it." Eldridge chuckled, stepping further into the room. "You don't understand, Porter. This isn't just some trinket. It's worth a fortune to the right buyer. You were too busy chasing your family's past to see what was right in front of you." Henry's mind raced. "You planned to sell it?" Eldridge smirked. "And I would have gotten away with it if you two hadn't started digging around." His gaze darted toward the window, where the distant clock tower loomed over the town square. "But now, I don't have time for this." Before anyone could stop him, he turned on his heel and bolted down the hall. "Stop him!" Ben shouted. They lunged forward, but Eldridge was faster. He crashed through the front door and into the darkened streets, his footsteps echoing through the empty town square. Henry and Ben sprinted after him, Mr. Porter close behind. The town was eerily silent, the streetlights casting elongated shadows as the trio pursued the thief. Eldridge dodged between buildings, weaving through alleys, desperate to escape. "The clock tower!" Henry gasped as he saw their target. Eldridge was heading straight for it. Ben cursed under his breath. "If he gets inside, we might lose him." Eldridge reached the tower's entrance and wrenched the heavy wooden door open. He slipped inside, the door slamming shut behind him. Henry reached the entrance moments later and yanked the handle. Locked. "Darn it," he muttered. Mr. Porter, breathing heavily, pointed upward. "We can still catch him. There's another entrance at the back, an old maintenance door." They rushed around the building, where Mr. Porter produced a rusted key from his pocket. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a spiraling staircase that wound its way up into darkness. "Be careful," Mr. Porter warned as they ascended, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Higher and higher they climbed until they emerged into the clock chamber. Gears turned sluggishly, their rhythmic clicking reverberating through the air. Moonlight filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating Eldridge as he frantically searched for an escape. "There's nowhere left to run!" Henry shouted. Eldridge spun to face them, the watch still clutched in his fist. His face was wild with desperation. "You don't understand. This watch is worth more than all of you put together. I won't let you take it from me." As he spoke, the heavy bell above them let out a deep, resonating chime. Midnight. The vibrations rattled the room, shaking dust from the rafters. Then something unexpected happened. The floor beneath them trembled, and a low grinding noise filled the chamber. The wall opposite the clock face quivered before with a loud clunk. A hidden door slid open, revealing a dark passageway leading into the unknown. Eldridge took a step back, eyes wide with shock. "What the—" Henry's breath caught in his throat. "The clock. It triggered the door." Ben swallowed hard. "But what's inside?" For a moment, no one moved. Then Eldridge's eyes gleamed with renewed determination. Before anyone could react, he lunged toward the opening. "No!" Henry yelled, diving forward. But it was too late. With a triumphant sneer, Eldridge sprinted into the darkness, just as the clock's gears groaned once more. With a sudden, deafening slam, the door shut behind him. Henry and Ben skidded to a halt, staring at the sealed wall in stunned silence. Mr. Porter, his face pale, whispered, "Where did he go?" Henry touched the stone surface, his fingers trembling. There was no handle, no latch, just cold, unyielding rock. Ben exhaled shakily. "I think he just trapped himself." But as they stood there, a muffled sound echoed from beyond the door, faint, distant, and laced with terror. A scream, then silence. Chapter 8. The Truth Revealed. Lucy's hands trembled slightly as she held the old pocket watch, its silver casing dull with age, but still gleaming under the flickering light of the street lamp. The watch, the object of so much mystery and turmoil in the past few weeks, had finally been recovered. It had taken persistence, a little luck, and some sharp detective work. But there it was, resting in the palm of her hand like a relic from another time. Jake leaned over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing. "Open it," he whispered. With a click, the watch popped open. The cracked glass cover barely held together, and the hands of the watch had long since stopped moving. But it wasn't the watch's inner workings that captured Lucy's attention. It was the small hidden compartment nestled behind the watch face. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside the compartment, wedged carefully, was a tiny brass key. "What in the world?" Jake muttered, reaching for it. He hesitated. "Is it part of the watch?" Lucy shook her head. "No, it's something else. Something important." Henry, who had been watching from a few feet away, stepped forward and took the watch from Lucy's hands. He turned it over, running his fingers along the edge before nodding in approval. "Smart work," he said. "This key isn't part of the watch at all. It was hidden here for a reason." Mr. Porter, who had been standing by quietly, suddenly gasped. His normally reserved expression twisted in shock as he reached for the key. "I don't believe it," he murmured. "You recognize it?" Lucy asked, her heart pounding. Porter nodded slowly, his eyes locked on the small key. This is the key to the old records room." The old town hall had long been abandoned, its records locked away in a back room that no one had accessed in decades. When the flood of 1978 had damaged parts of the building, the town had sealed off the lower level, deeming it unsafe. Rumors swirled about lost documents and forgotten history, but no one had ever been able to get inside to confirm them. Now, standing in front of the decrepit door, Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. The brass key in her hand felt heavier than it should, as though it carried the weight of the town's untold past. Henry, now fully convinced of the key's importance, gestured toward the lock. "Go on, kid. Let's see what secrets this town's been keeping." Lucy took a deep breath, slid the key into the rusty lock, and turned. A soft click echoed through the empty hall. Jake pushed the door open and a rush of stale air greeted them. Inside, dust-covered shelves lined the walls, filled with stacks of yellowed papers, bound ledgers, and crumbling maps. "It's all here," Mr. Porter said in awe, stepping inside and brushing his fingers over the old books. "The town's lost history." Lucy and Jake exchanged a glance. "But why was the key hidden inside the stolen watch?" Jake asked. Mr. Porter turned to face them. "Because someone didn't want these records to be found." As they sifted through the records, a story began to unfold. One of lost land deeds, erased names, and hidden betrayals. Mr. Porter found a ledger from 1892, detailing property transfers that had never been documented in modern town records. One name, in particular, appeared over and over again: the Calloway family. "They were one of the original settlers here," Porter explained. "Their land covered a massive portion of what's now the town square and surrounding neighborhoods." Lucy's brow furrowed as she scanned the records. "But according to everything we know, this land was always public property." Porter's lips thinned. "That's because someone stole it from them. These records prove that the Calloway family's land was forcibly taken after they disappeared. Their deeds were never properly transferred. The town hall records show no legal sales, no legitimate claims, just sudden, unaccounted ownership changes." Henry let out a low whistle. "Looks like someone covered their tracks well." Lucy turned to Jake. "And whoever did it must have hidden this key to make sure no one ever found out." Jake nodded. "But if the key was hidden in the watch, and the watch was stolen, does that mean the thief knew about the records?" Henry's eyes darkened. "Or they were trying to keep someone else from finding them." After hours of combing through the documents, it became clear. The Calloway family had been wronged. Their land had been illegally seized, their name wiped from town history, and their legacy forgotten. Mr. Porter, now completely cleared of suspicion regarding the stolen watch, stood before the mayor the next morning, presenting the recovered records. The mayor, stunned by the revelation, immediately called a town meeting. "This changes everything," he admitted. "Our town's history is incomplete without the Calloway family's story." The townspeople listened in awe as Mr. Porter shared his findings, speaking with passion about the missing pieces of their past. He revealed how generations of town leaders had unknowingly built on stolen land, how families had unknowingly lived on property that wasn't rightfully theirs. When he finished, a solemn silence fell over the room. "We have to make this right," someone finally said. The mayor nodded. "And we will." Lucy and Jake's moment of triumph. As the town celebrated its newfound history, Lucy and Jake found themselves at the center of attention. "You two have done some incredible work," the mayor said, shaking their hands. "Without your determination, we might never have uncovered the truth." Henry clapped a hand on Lucy's shoulder. "I've got to say, kid, you've got a real knack for detective work," he grinned. "You might just take over my job one day." Lucy laughed, feeling a rush of pride. Jake smirked. "I think I deserve a little credit, too." Henry chuckled. Yeah, you're a good sidekick." Jake groaned. "Sidekick? Oh, come on." Mr. Porter smiled at them both. "No matter what titles you two take, you've made a real difference here, and that's what matters most." As the town moved forward, vowing to honor the Calloway legacy and restore the truth to its rightful place in history, Lucy and Jake stood side by side, watching the town they loved embrace its past. For the first time in weeks, Lucy felt at peace. The mystery had been solved. The truth had been revealed. And she knew deep down that this was only the beginning of many more adventures to come.